This is Little Green Ghouls, and welcome back to Goosebumps Revisited, a series where I break down a classic Goosebumps book and any episode that goes along with it. I will also be totaling up some Goosebumps cliches and classic moments. This week, I'm excited to visit Night of the Living Dead. Dummy. This was a book I thought I remembered, but as I was reading it, I realized I had it completely wrong. Seasoned Goosebumps fans probably know what I'm talking about, but if you're going into this book thinking Slappy's going to be the star of the show, you're in for a surprise. I remember the Slappy TV episode scaring me because living dolls like Chucky had already been firmly planted in my mind as terrifying, just by looking at the VHS covers at Hollywood Video. Another thing I never realized until this week is that there's no episode adaptation of the first book, so I was forced to go for a different episode not from the original 62 books called An Old Story, but we can get more into that later. When looking at the original cover, I think it's extremely effective and easily one of the scarier covers. I think Slappy looks menacing as hell, and there's no way I would drag that dummy home from the trash. My only complaint would be that it sets the expectation that Slappy is the star of the book, which maybe lends itself to a twist, but really I just spent most of the book waiting for Slappy, and really didn't expect him to get going on literally the last two lines of the book. The 2003 version straightens Slappy out for some reason, and the colors seem a bit brighter. I think I would have liked it more if they had kept him crooked with the brighter colors, but what do I know? The 2008 version is less realistic, and for that reason alone I find it less intimidating and creepy. I'd be curious to know who prefers this version, since I know I'm heavily biased based on nostalgia alone. Slappy definitely looks creepy in his own way here, but it doesn't do it for me. As far as merchandise goes, there's a lot. Slappy is probably the most iconic of the Goosebumps monsters, and I think he's probably a lot of people's favorite villain, so he gets plastered everywhere. Some notable items include notebooks, masks, something called monster bags, mysterious gummy snacks, he's a video game star, and of course Pog. Our front tag says, he walks. He stalks. My issue with this is, no he doesn't, Mr. Wood does. Although, there are hints that Slappy is running around in the background too. The back tag says, he's no dummy. And that's true. He's a sinister little creature. Before we jump into the summary, let's read the blurb on the back. Lindy names the ventriloquist dummy she finds Slappy. Slappy is kinda ugly, but he's a lot of fun. Lindy's having a great time learning to make Slappy move and talk. But Chris is jealous of all the attention her sister is getting. It's no fair. Why does Lindy always get all the luck? Chris decides to get a dummy of her own. She'll show Chris. Then weird things begin to happen. Nasty things. Evil things. No way a dummy can be causing all this trouble. Or is there? Did you guys notice the typo there where it says Chris decides to get a dummy of her own? She'll show Chris. Chris will show herself. Anyways, on to the summary. The book begins with our introduction to our first pair of Goosebumps twins. We have Chris and Lindy Powell. And through our trademark Stein character description, we learn that they're both 12, short, blonde, blue-eyed, with broad foreheads, large noses, and dimples. The major difference between the two is that Lindy has long hair that she likes to keep in a ponytail, and Chris has hers cut very short. If I accidentally say Lindsay instead of Lindy, forgive me. My dyslexic ass is trying. The girls are quickly established as competitive, and as the book goes on, you'll see that's a massive understatement. They're also apparently too cool for life, because when their mother suggests they go outside, Lindy says, "We're 12, we're too old to go out and play." I must have missed the memo, because I love going outside and frolicking with my tomato plants. The mom then suggests the girls take Barky for a walk. Yes, the dog's name is Barky, and no, he's not a Cocker Spaniel. This time the dog's a little black terrier. We're only allowed terriers and Cocker Spaniels in Goosebumps, that's how it works. They head off for a bike ride to the park and stop to admire the new house being built next door. Chris fantasizes about a good-looking set of twin boys moving in, and I swear I saw a news article about a twin-on-twin wedding, and it was certainly something. The girls explore the construction site, and Lindy warns Chris to watch out for nails, cause if you step on one, you'll get lockjaw and die. I definitely feared this as a child, so maybe this is the origin story. While the girls are trespassing, they hear quick, soft footsteps inside the house. They conclude that it's just a squirrel, and then shortly after this scare, Lindy finds a ventriloquist dummy and a chapter cliffhanger, cause Chris for some reason thinks it's a dead toddler or something. Lindy immediately gets into character and starts playing with the dummy and giving sarcastic responses through gritted teeth. Chris thinks he could be full of bugs, but that doesn't deter Lindy. I'm with you, Chris. Lindy decides to name him Slappy because, come over here and I'll slap you. Just some casual sibling violence. I can see how Barky got his name with creativity like this. Although, I'm not gonna lie, Slappy the dummy is an iconic name. Lindy makes it clear she plans on keeping him despite Chris's disapproval, and she thinks Slappy is cute. And Slappy sounds like a dapper little guy, so I kinda get it. Lindy already has big plans for Slappy, and thinks she could earn some extra cash by performing at kids' birthday parties. I support a side hustle. Slappy then says, "Happy birthday, hand over some money." I think Lindy is my current fave right now. Lindy then does an impromptu street performance for some local ginger kids and concludes that Chris just must be jealous. But she does stop to notice that Slappy seems to be grinning extra hard at her. We cut to 1 week later and Lindy's already getting gigs because this is fiction after all. She has a birthday party performance scheduled for Amy and Ben, the two ginger kids we just met 30 seconds ago. Apparently, Lindy's gotten very serious about Slappy, and even took him to school to perform. And to Chris's and my surprise, The kids loved it, and she did not get bullied relentlessly for it. Chris takes a turn for the worst, and suddenly decides she wants a ventriloquist dummy of her own too, because of all the attention Lindy is getting. Chris, you are now firmly in last place in my rankings because no one likes an insecure copycat. And that includes Lindy, who is rightfully annoyed that her sister can't get her own hobbies and has to move in onto hers. The parents decide to support Chris because they suck, and they force the girls to share Slappy. As Chris goes to smugly retrieve Slappy, he suddenly whips his head around and says, "Beat it, Chris, get lost, you stupid moron," and slaps her across the face like only Slappy can. This is so much like a G-rated version of this Child's Play scene.
Hi, I'm Chucky, wanna play?
I said talk to me, damn it, or else I'm gonna throw you in the fire!
You stupid bitch, you filthy slut!
Lindy claims to have not done it, and I'm kind of inclined to believe her considering Slappy is on the cover, but the rest of this family isn't privy to that knowledge. The dad says, "Stop being dumb and apologize to your sister." Lindy tries to apologize through Slappy, but that gets shot down quickly, and she's forced to hand over Slappy. The mom then adds some salt to the wound by saying to Lindy, "Why'd you make such a fuss? That was so babyish." Screw you two, Mom. How about you make Lindy grow up and get her own hobbies? Chris then has the nerve to ask Lindy how to work Slappy, versus just figuring it out herself like Lindy had to. Chris sucks. I tell her to stuff Slappy up her ass. We cut to later that night, and Chris has just woken up from a nightmare where she's being chased by something, but she couldn't remember what it was. I don't know, Chris. How about your conscience? She gets out of bed and plays with Slappy for a bit, who she thinks is smiling more than usual. She creeps herself out and heads back to bed. To her surprise, though, in a chapter cliffhanger, Slappy grabs her wrist. Just kidding, it was Lindy who managed to sneak out of bed without Chris noticing somehow. Too bad she didn't grab her shoulder though, because then we could have added it to the count. Chris goes back to sleep, but not before resenting Slappy for smiling at her, and as she falls asleep, she dreams of an evil presence chasing her. Gee, I wonder who that could be. The next day, the kids arrive home after their spring concert rehearsal, where they were singing these Russian and Yugoslavian songs. They're so sad. They're about sheep or something. There's no translation. What kind of school concerts did you perform in as a kid, Stein? We get a really stupid chapter cliffhanger where Chris walks into the living room and freaks out because there's another dummy next to Slappy. This scares her for reasons unknown, and she declares, "What's going on here?" Your spoiled ass got its own dummy, that's what, you little brat. This new dummy is redheaded and dressed less formal than Slappy, because he's in jeans, tennis shoes, and has a red and green flannel. Slappy still sounds superior in my opinion. Chris names him Mr. Wood, which is certainly a choice. Chris forces her friend Cody to come over so she can practice her act on him. She's terrible at it, and Cody has no problems letting her know. It's kind of nice to see Chris get some honest feedback, and he points out that she doesn't even seem like she wants to be a ventriloquist, which she acknowledges is true. She just wants to be better than Lindy. She concludes that she needs a good joke book and then she'll be set. Chris, I think you need a better personality, because you're kind of the evil twin right now. At bedtime, Lindy notices Chris has a fancy outfit laid out for tomorrow, and we learn that the class is having a dress-up party to say goodbye to their student teacher. Once again, I don't know what school Stein went to where kids have formal parties and sing Yugoslavian songs. It's also important to note that this skirt is Betsy Johnson, because it's the early 90s and she was having a resurgence. The next morning, Mr. Wood is missing, and when found, he is of course wearing Chris's fancy clothes. Mr. Wood looks good in Betsy Johnson. Lindy gets the blame, and Chris is pissed at her sister. In the back of Chris's head though, she kind of believes that Lindy didn't do it and is suspicious of Mr. Wood. Later on, the twins decide to torment their friends some more with their ventriloquist acts. These kids have a high tolerance for vaudeville, so Cody and Alice are good sports and put up with this mess. Lindy continues to dream big and imagines herself booking TV shows like Jeff Dunham. Lindy grabs Mr. Wood and gives Chris some much needed tips. When Mr. Wood starts insulting Chris, Lindy claims she can't stop it and he's doing it on his own. This freaks all the kids out, but they move past it pretty quickly. Personally, I thought Lindy was just doing some much deserved venting. Later, Lindy returns for the birthday party, and apparently it was a massive success. She said all the kids loved it, and she even performed her rap routine with Slappy. This is the second time this rap routine has been mentioned, and I really wish we'd get a detailed description of what it looks like. I bet it's amazing. Chris reveals while Lindy was out getting rich, she ran into the concert teacher at the mall, and she wants Chris to host the spring concert with Mr. Wood. Why this woman offers that is not explained. It's not like Chris is good with Mr. Wood, and I doubt the teacher has seen her perform with him. And also, like, a spring concert is not the venue for a ventriloquist host, so I don't know what school for the third time Stein went to. After dinner and some quality VHS time, the girls head to their rooms and discover that Mr. Wood has ravaged Slappy and looks to be strangling him. They decide to tell their mother about the dummies, and she's about as helpful as you would expect. Chris decides to lock Mr. Wood in the closet that night. The next morning, she wakes up and finds Mr. Wood with his arm around Slappy mocking her. We just brush past this and end up cutting to 2 days later when Chris is practicing her routine in the mirror for the school concert. Apparently, Mr. Wood has been on his best behavior, and Chris is feeling more confident in her ventriloquist abilities. Lindy appears and informs Chris that at her last birthday performance, somebody from Channel 3 News noticed her and thought she would be good enough for the weekly TV show, Talent Search. Stein, I get that this is fiction, but let's bring it back down to planet Earth, please. Chris is, of course, extremely jealous and throws Mr. Wood down in a fit of rage. This seems to low-key anger Mr. Wood, so we'll just see how this concert goes. We hop to Lindy's perspective, and that night she's awoken by Chris sneaking out of bed to get some water. Once in the hall, Lindy hears Chris scream in a chapter cliffhanger. Lindy makes it downstairs before the parents, and she sees Chris standing in front of an empty fridge. And I was kind of really hoping that she screamed because the food was all gone and there was nothing to eat. Someone has emptied the entire fridge on the floor and mixed Chris's jewelry collection into the mess. Amongst all this, we see Mr. Wood decked out in Chris's jewelry with a platter of chicken on his lap. I told you she shouldn't have body slammed him. The mom appears and she is pissed. Since neither of the girls would fess up, she decides to take both of the dummies away. The girls are able to convince her to let them keep the dummies by promising to scrub the kitchen and pay to replace all of the food. This works and both girls keep their dummies, even though Chris really never wanted hers to start with, and she kind of seems to be actively fearful of the dummy right now, so... As Chris is falling back asleep, she hears Mr. Wood shouting, "Let me out!" from inside the closet. I thought this was a possible dream sequence, but no. Lindy suddenly confesses that all this weird shit from Mr. Wood was actually her all along. This was probably our biggest prank bro so far. This might be a controversial opinion, but at this point, I'm not really enjoying this book like I thought I would. I was super excited for it, but it's been pretty boring with a shit main character, and now it's revealed that the only interesting things that have happened have been the work of Lindsay. Although I won't disagree, Chris deserves it for being a whiny little copycat. Lindy shows zero remorse and continues to mock Chris, as Chris contemplates how she could possibly been so stupid. Before returning back to sleep, Chris begins to plot her own revenge. We then hop to a few days later, and Chris is still practicing with Mr. Wood because it's the day before the concert. As she's practicing, she notices a little yellow note in his pocket, and then reads this out loud. Karu Mari Odana Lama Malanu Karanu. Oh shit, we got voodoo. Never read words like this out loud or you'll summon some shit or wake the dead. Chris thinks that Mr. Wood blinked at her but continues on with her act. Later, the Millers, who are an elderly couple next door, want to watch the girls perform with their dummies. This is kind of odd because the parents have forbidden the girls from mentioning the dummies whatsoever, but I guess they're fine with bragging to the neighbors about them. Lindy goes first, and she does great, making the Millers laugh. Chris seethes and tells herself that none of Lindy's stuff is that good or original. When Chris goes next, Mr. Wood jumps straight into insult humor, saying, "Is that a mustache, or are you eating a rat? Don't laugh too hard, you might drop your false teeth. How do you get your teeth that disgusting shade of yellow? Does your bad breath do that? I'm sorry you're so ugly. I'm sorry you're so old and so stupid too." This does not go well, and Chris insists that it wasn't her while racing off to her room crying. The Millers are not pleased, and neither are Chris's parents. Chris insists to Lindy that it wasn't her controlling Mr. Wood, and Lindy rightfully suspects that she's just copycatting again, this time her own practical joke. We then cut to concert night because Chris is so damn stubborn and jealous that she's going to perform with this dummy, even though she's not very good and she now has no control over him. The concert goes even worse than expected. The moment Chris gets on stage, she is frozen with fear, and as the teacher approaches Mr. Wood, he starts launching into insults and he gets some pretty good ones in. "What time does the blimp go up? Your face reminds me of a wart I had removed. If we count your chins, will it tell us your age? You're more than enough. You've had enough for two. If you got any bigger, you need your own zip code." To top it all off, Mr. Wood then summons his inner Reagan and begins spewing green slime all over the place, and it smells so nasty that they have to clear the auditorium. The dummy's head tilted back, his jaw dropped, his mouth opened wide, and a thick green liquid came spewing out. "Yuck," someone screamed. It looked like pea soup. It spurted out of Mr. Wood's open mouth like water rushing from a fire hose. Voices screamed and cried out to their surprise as the thick green liquid showered people in the front rows. "Stop it! Help! Somebody turn it off! It stinks!" A putrid stench, the smell of sour milk, of rotten eggs, of burning rubber, of decayed meat, rose up from the liquid. It puddled over the stage and showered over the front seats. This was all so over the top that I thought for sure that we were dealing with a dream sequence, but no, this actually happened. This book is kind of redeeming itself a bit now. This also would have been a great time to use the vomit count if the slime would have set off a vomit fest like in Stand By Me.
Poor Bill Travis knew it. He was covered with 5 pies worth of used blueberries. Boss man Bob Cormier took one look at Bill Travis and barfed on Principal Wig, barfed on his wife's tits. Kids barfed on their parents. A fat lady barfed in her purse. The Donnelly twins barfed on each other. And the women's auxiliary barfed all over the Benevolent Order of Animals.
For some reason, the parents decide to put Mr. Wood in Chris's closet and tell her she's not allowed to touch him again and that he's going back to the pawn shop. If they truly believe their daughter was doing all these horrible things, why do they think keeping Mr. Wood in her own closet would stop her? I guess we needed him in there because, of course, that night, while everybody else is asleep, Chris sees the closet door open and she comes across Mr. Wood and he's running around in a reverse shoulder scare. Mr. Wood hisses and growls at her, but Chris just keeps holding onto his shoulder like an idiot. He threatens to throw her down the stairs and she declares that she'll be locking him in a box or something. Great way to give away your plan, Chris. Mr. Wood follows through with his threat and takes them both down the stairs. Chris won't let go, so he punches her in the stomach. As he's running off, she trips him and then pounces on top of him. As they're wrestling, Lindy appears and Mr. Wood reverts to playing dead. At this point, Lindy thinks Chris has just lost her damn mind, but as Chris starts to release Mr. Wood, he takes off running. Lindy runs to get the parents while Chris continues to wrestle Mr. Wood, but as soon as the parents appear, he of course goes back to playing dead. The dad then says, "I really think you've lost your mind. I'm really worried about you." The parents, feeling defeated in their own parenting skills, retreat to bed, leaving the two girls to deal with Mr. Wood on their own. Once out of sight, Mr. Wood springs back to life and then says to the two girls, "You will be my slaves now." This is the second Goosebumps book to feature slavery. Chris tries to read the ancient words at Mr. Wood in a chapter ending, but these ancient words bring dummies to life. It doesn't kill them, obviously. The girls then pin him down and decide to pull his head off. Mr. Wood enjoys this a little too much, and it kind of gets awkward, and he claims that it tickles. They then decide to cut his head off with scissors, but not before Mr. Wood takes a bite out of Chris's arm. I like that during all of this, the parents are in bed like, whatever, as their kids just keep screaming and thrashing around the house. The girls are shocked to learn that scissors aren't great at cutting wood. Even with a sawing motion, they decide to lock him in a closet because, that's worked so well the previous times. Thankfully, they remember that their closet lacks a lock, so we are able to quickly move past this onto the next plan, which is of course locking him in a suitcase. Throughout this struggle, Mr. Wood continues to shout about them being slaves, his magic powers, violence, and he'll hurt the ones that they love. He talks a big game for something that's been subdued repeatedly by two small 12-year-old girls. They get him in the suitcase and then decide the best course of action is to bury him at the house next door. Also, both girls suggest waking their parents up but decide against it because they don't want to get in any more trouble. So throughout this past hour, the parents have been sleeping as a strange voice is shouting about turning their daughters into slaves at 3:30 in the morning. I think we may have found our new worst set of parents. The girls bury the dummy next door and return home. Since there are still quite a few pages left, the fun is obviously not over. The next morning, seated at the breakfast table covered in dirt is of course Mr. Wood. This makes the mom pissed because she told Chris not to mess with him again. The parents suddenly have to leave to go to the gardening store because it's going to rain soon, so it's urgent to leave these two girls alone with Mr. Wood. Lindy comes downstairs and Mr. Wood says, "I'm very unhappy with you two slaves." He then repeats this line in case you wanted to hear it again. He wants to show the girls he means business by grabbing Barky by the throat in a chapter cliffhanger as the dog squeals in pain. Chris is able to free Barky, but gets smacked hard across the face in the process. Lindy grabs Mr. Wood by his legs and Chris attempts to get his arms, but not before getting bit again on the wrist this time. Chris is really getting roughed up in this story. The girls get a good hold of him and race outside to throw him in front of the steamrollers that just so happen to be operating next door. This plan is going great until Barky decides to join in on the action and almost gets himself smushed. This causes the girls to drop Mr. Wood before they can throw him in front of the steamroller. Unfortunately for Mr. Wood, he took off running without looking both ways and then just so happens to get squashed by a second steamroller on the scene. The steamroller gets him good and a green mushroom cloud of rotten egg gas floats out of his flattened body. The poor machine operator thinks he ran over a kid though, so he hops off it thinking he killed someone. The girls assure him, nope, just a dummy that can run, and head back home. Once inside, they head up to the room to change where they are greeted with this line from Slappy. "Hey slaves, is that other guy gone? I thought he'd never leave." And that's it. That's how the book ends. This entire book, I thought it would be all about Slappy, and it was really just about Mr. Wood, so I'm kind of sitting here like, huh. As far as this week's episode is concerned, it's kind of a weird situation. Night of the Living Dummy Part 2 has an episode, but not the first book. I've read various reasons why, and rather than spread internet rumors further without knowledge of what the actual truth is, the main point is there's no Part 1 this week. Instead, I've decided to take a look at An Old Story, which is the fourth short story in the Still More Tales to Give You Goosebumps books. I enjoyed the last short story adaptation in the Curse of the Mummy's Tomb video, with the story Don't Wake Mummy, and I have vague memories of these really gross prune cookies, so hopefully this holds up well. Since there's no context, I'll read the blurb to get you up to speed. Tom and John are surprised when their strange Aunt Delia arrives to look after them while their parents are on vacation. Their surprise turns to shock, though, when they realize that she has more in store for them. Well, that's pretty vague, so I don't really know where this story is heading, other than two kids aging rapidly based off the episode still. Right away, I'm recognizing two things. One is that the opening shot of the house is from Let's Get Invisible, and two, That's the basement from Don't Wake Mummy. I wonder how often I'll notice reused set pieces when I'm on these rewatches. As far as notable cast goes, only 2 seem to have kept on acting. One is Kyle Downs, who played Tom. The biggest thing from he was in was Lizzie McGuire quite a bit, but he seems to have moved more behind the scenes. The other notable cast member is Patricia Gage, who played Aunt Delilah. She's been in a ton of movies, but I love that she was in Cronenberg's Rabid, in a scene that actually kept my first video that I made constantly getting copyrighted, because I could not get past the Rabid scene. Our protagonists, brothers Tom and John, are in the basement when suddenly Aunt Delilah appears with some psycho-inspired music.
Here's your tarantula.
Aunt Delilah says a line that gives up the entire premise of the episode in hindsight.
Handsome. I just know the girls are gonna go crazy for you when you're older. I'm so...
I also love that the virtual reality game setup these kids use.
Get them while they're hot. No, sorry, I didn't mean to scare you.
I guess we thought that the future was floppy with kush balls hot glued to things. I think Aunt Delilah's cookies are supposed to look gross, but I'd eat one without hesitation.
They're moving.
Also, can we pause and reflect how Tom is dressed like a biker from The Sims? He just needs the red bandana. After the boys go to bed, the sudden aging reveal in the morning is pretty fun.
Prune waffles. Want a taste?
What happened to your hair?
Huh? I'll wear what I want to wear.
This episode takes a very weird and sudden turn because suddenly the boys are not just aging, they are being aged so they can be sold off to these old ladies.
Now, where are those 2 cute boys you've told us so much about?
The suspense is killing me.
Oh, my.
I'm Lillian. Oh, you're so sweet. Well, and you're graying up nicely.
I would like to know the logic here. Why can't these old ladies become sugar mamas to some adult-aged men? Eventually, Tom gets to go to the store to grab some milk, where we are treated to some fun scenes and some more rapid aging.
Will that be all, sir? We have a special on antacid for senior citizens.
Senior citizens?
I think the old makeup looks pretty good personally. I love when they try to escape from the old women by trying to crawl out the window, but then they realize they're too old to get away.
Oh, the girls want to play bridge. Don't you want to play with us? You're not.
Also, in case you were confused on this gross plot, they clarify it further.
Little Jonathan is so adorable, and Lillian wants to marry Tom. Nobody's getting married until you pay my fee. Then we'll talk. Oh.
Eventually, the boys meet in the kitchen where we get this great line.
What's taking so long?
Good snacks take time.
They find some baby food and decide to eat it because everything else hurts their teeth.
All I want is something I can eat.
Food? What's that doing here?
You know, Mom, she gets some weird cravings when she's pregnant.
Why would the mom eat baby food when she's pregnant? Cravings or not. For some reason, the baby food magically de-ages them.
This baby food is pretty good.
You're getting younger.
The boys get cornered by the old ladies again, and Tom decides to throw prune juice on Aunt Delilah.
Not prune juice.
I love that these old ladies were just kind of like, bye.
Nice to have met you. We must be going.
Yes, we're late for bingo. Across town.
Bye-bye. Bye, boys.
The episode throws in one final twist, which we don't get to see resolved.
Oh, no.
I have to say, this episode was straight up wild. I did not think Aunt Delilah would be running like a human trafficking ring for older women, to say the least. If you think too much about it, the episode's really gross, but I won't pretend that it wasn't a good time. Anyways, as far as Night of the Living Dummy goes, I think my own expectations ruined this one a bit for me. I had completely forgotten that Slappy isn't the star of the book, which I think is pretty reasonable considering he's on the goddamn cover, and that Mr. Wood is our big villain. When I first finished the book, I was kind of really resenting this, but after a day I realized it's still a good story. Mr. Wood vomiting putrid green slime all over the audience was great, and Chris essentially being a prolonged asshole victim that gets what she deserves is also pretty notable. Overall, it had some creepy moments and fun scenes, like when Lindy and Chris battle Mr. Wood as their parents ignore their cries, and the death by steamroller is pretty great. I'm going to give this one 4 out of 5 Woodies. Alright, on to our Goosebumps totals. We don't have any It's Only a Dream or shoulder scares, but we did have a few 90s moments. In getting jiggy with the 90s, we had 3 90s moments, the smallest selection so far. These included a Betsy Johnson skirt, renting VHSs, and the mom reading Stephen King in bed. Yes, I'm counting that because it gave me childhood flashbacks. This brings our series total to 46 jiggy 90s moments. As far as asshole victims go, I'm going to go ahead and count Chris getting cursed by a ventriloquist dummy after being a loser copycat who tries to steal her sister's thunder, only to have it backfire massively. I think she probably learned her lesson. This brings our series total to 6 asshole victims. Vomit count remains at 0, although I did consider including Mr. Wood's slime in the audience since it sounded worse than vomit. This leaves the series at 0, and now I'm convinced that I imagined every instance of vomit I thought was in these books as a child. We had one big It's a Prank Bro that resulted in a handful of smaller pranks. Chris thinking Mr. Wood was alive for the first half of the novel ends up being just Lindy getting her own revenge. This brings us up to 10 It's a Prank Bros. Night of the Living Dummy had 10 chapter cliffhangers. Overall, these cliffhangers weren't terrible, and they definitely raised the stakes each time. This raises our Goosebumps total to 97. The clunky cliffhanger award for this book goes to chapters 1 to 2, where Chris immediately thinks Lindy is lifting up the body of a dead child for some reason. Shocker ending. There was a substantial twist to the Night of the Living Dummy, with the girls returning to find Slappy sitting on the bed chatting about slavery. I considered this whole book to be one big twist really, since I thought it was Slappy-centric, when really this was Mr. Wood's book. This brings our shocker ending series total to 5. Well, that's it for Night of the Living Dummy. I enjoyed this book despite it failing to live up to my own imagined expectations. Now I'm even more excited for the sequel since that has to be Slappy-centric, right? Please tell me I'm right. Be sure to let me know what you thought of Night of the Living Dummy in the comments. Are you into ventriloquists? What's your favorite Yugoslavian song about sheep? Also, what did you think of my evil doll clips? Anyways, thanks again for watching, and make sure you subscribe for
The pride, the love,